Hey there folks, this is Pop Culture, I'm Alex Pop, and this is part 3 of my spoiler talk for Jurassic World Dominion. One of the things you'll hear most often be said about this movie, especially from the minority such as myself who loved Fallen Kingdom, is that it's the Rise of Skywalker of Jurassic Park. It's not hard to see where the comparison comes from. It's the final part of a trilogy that walks back on a lot of the ideas that the prior installments set up for this one. The strange difference, though, is that there's a more easily perceptible reason for why the Star Wars sequel trilogy is as disjointed as it is. Kathleen Kennedy allowed too much creative freedom with the different directors, and so we got conflicting visions with each film. The way it all played out was like, J.J. Abrams had this really big, fancy, luxurious dinner prepared, Rian Johnson comes in and flips the table over, Abrams comes back and he's like, well, I guess we're ordering Domino's. In the case of the Jurassic World trilogy, Colin Trevorrow produced and wrote all 3 films with his usual writing partner, Derek Connolly. So even though, like the Star Wars sequels, the middle part had a different director, Trevorrow still had heavy input on it, whereas Rian Johnson had full control over The Last Jedi and Last Jedi only. I was sure that Trevorrow had everything carefully planned out. I was sure that Star Wars fans were soon to realize just how much they lost when Lucasfilm discarded his Episode 9 script. So, what the heck happened? Well, honestly, I wish I was joking when I say the best I can figure is that the mindset was, Fallen Kingdom wasn't very beloved, so we're gonna make a kinda sequel to Fallen Kingdom, but ignore as much of that movie as possible and just play it really safe. Seeming to overlook the fact that even those who hated Fallen Kingdom were still interested in what it was building up for the next movie. I still really respect Colin Trevorrow for how much he loves Jurassic fans and how interactive he is with them online, but I'm going to have to hold his feet to the fire here for not committing to what he himself set up. When talking about the cliffhanger ending of Fallen Kingdom at the time it was coming out, Trevorrow described the next one as, quote, a dinosaur movie I've always wanted to see, and it took 2 movies to earn it. But when you see how Dominion plays out, it clearly doesn't need the other 2 Jurassic World movies in order to happen, which is why I have a very hard time believing that this really is that movie he had in mind for so long. I get deep into this in the first 2 parts of the Spoiler Talk series. In this video, I'm going to be dissecting what is the most evident case of reactionary course correction in this movie, what it does with the character of Maisie Lockwood. Her storyline in Fallen Kingdom is the most misunderstood aspect of that movie, as well as one of the storylines that I was looking most forward to seeing the completion of in Dominion. Now, when it comes to the kid characters of Jurassic Park, Tim Murphy is the one that I relate to the most. I was the kind of kid who wouldn't shut up about facts I knew, especially ones about dinosaurs, even to people who weren't listening, and I would continue rattling on even after someone closed the door on me. I'll never forget watching the first Jurassic Park at age 13 and my mom joking about who Tim reminded us of. However, I take no shame in saying that my favorite child character in any of these movies is Maisie in Fallen Kingdom. The scenes with her sneaking around the rooftops of the manor and wandering curiously around the lab had an appealing Spielbergian-like innocence to them, and you can kinda see that's what they were going for with her spending most of the movie in a red hoodie like Elliot in E.T. And at the risk of sounding sentimental, she was just darling. Isabella Sermon did a phenomenal job. From her tears to her giddy spirit to the shock, confusion, and fright that surges through her all at once when she finds out what she is, she sold every moment of it. And to see everything that she goes through in that one night, losing her grandfather, finding out that she's not a naturally conceived human, and realizing that her one lifelong guardian left sees her as just lucrative property, it was heartbreaking. And the thing that so many critics of this movie miss is how that all plays into her belief at the end that freeing the dinosaurs is the right thing to do. And I loved the reveal of her being a clone. For one thing, because it adds to past Jurassic lore, or at least it did until Dominion came out, and it brings this different perspective to the moral dilemma of whether or not the dinosaurs are entitled to the rights of other animals. If we're just going to dismiss them as undeserving of those rights on the grounds that they're unnaturally created, the same reasoning would have to be applied to Maisie, that she would have to be viewed as less than human, the way Eli Mills sees her. This is driven home in her line, they're alive, like me. Putting aside the utterly mean reputation the character has gotten because of that moment, the other response that has bewildered me is from the viewers who say that the mere idea of human cloning in the Jurassic universe is stupid. Right, so we've got no problem suspending disbelief when it comes to cloning dinosaurs from DNA that should be long since expired, but cloning a recently deceased human is just way too out there? Got it. Now, of course, I don't want to see Attack of the Clones or anything like that, like some mercenary making a clone army of himself to do battle with dinosaurs or something along those lines. That would be way too overboard, and it would distract from the majesty of the dinosaurs. But the way Fallen Kingdom went about it, keeping it to the simplicity of this one young girl who is something of a personification of the dinosaurs, the idea was handled beautifully. But, despite all of that, it didn't stop Colin Trevorrow from backtracking a bit in what is an apparent attempt to appease the detractors, as if he was like, okay, yeah, she's a clone, but not in that way, not really. As a result, in Dominion, we get a new reveal about Maisie that is, at best, unnecessary, and at worst, canon butchering. In that overlong expository newsreel at the beginning, it mentions that rumors are floating around about a clone of Charlotte Lockwood, and naturally my thought from this was, wait, Benjamin Lockwood's daughter was named Charlotte? Why did he rename her when he made Maisie? And well, it makes sense later on when we hear about what doesn't make sense later on. As we're reintroduced to Maisie 4 years after Fallen Kingdom, Claire and Owen are restricting her to the property of Owen's now-finished cabin, so she doesn't get sighted by anyone who might hand her over to evil geneticists. She's grown into an angsty, rebellious teen, which is understandable to a degree. I mean, being locked down for 2 years, that'll do it, we all know. I say 2 years instead of 4 because, off the grid, Book 1 of Maisie Lockwood Adventures is set 2 years before Dominion, and in it the three of them are out camping places. So Maisie is having an identity crisis, struggling to see herself as her own person, knowing that she was created essentially just to be someone else. And this does make some sense for her character, especially when you consider how in Fallen Kingdom she was being instructed to speak and act a certain way, and later she finds out it was also that Benjamin could convince himself that this truly was his daughter alive again.
I don't want a bath.
What? Queen's English girl. Bath.
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 Bath. Not bath. You're not a wild animal.
And this gives her more of an urge to be rebellious against Owen and Claire, with the further restrictions being put on her now. It's a character setup that I wasn't expecting, but I was able to get behind at first. Up until I realized that it had all been leading to a retcon. Maisie gets kidnapped by the poachers sent by Dodgson, and they take her to the lab in Biosyn Valley, where Dr. Wu explains to her why they need her DNA to make the pathogen that will halt the locust outbreak. He proceeds to tell her that contrary to what she knew, it wasn't Benjamin Lockwood who created her, it was Charlotte. We learned through old video recordings that Charlotte lived on Isla Sorna before Hurricane Clarissa hit, and she grew up to be a brilliant scientist. She discovered the way to use her own DNA to impregnate herself, and so gave birth to Maisie. Soon after, Charlotte was diagnosed with a genetic disease that Maisie would have inherited, so before she died from it, she gave Maisie these injections that altered her DNA and saved her from the disease before it could do any damage to her. Because of what Maisie's DNA now holds, this is why Benjamin kept her hidden away. I will mention that this was my mom's favorite part of the movie. She found it very moving when Maisie was able to take that weight off her shoulders, knowing that she was made to be more than just a replacement, that she really did have a loving mother. However, my mom did also acknowledge that she's always just kind of seen these movies as each their own thing, while I'm a lot more about the big picture of the whole franchise. And when you take into account the big picture, there are serious plot holes that arise from this new reveal. When it got to this point in Dominion, the first thought that went through my mind was, I kind of liked this better when it wasn't so complicated. And then everything we were told in Fallen Kingdom began sinking in, and I liked it even less. The first reason I find this to be obvious backtracking is that based on our understanding from Fallen Kingdom alone, Benjamin Lockwood had an emotional motivation to create Maisie. He lost his daughter and he never got over it. From what we learn in Dominion, Charlotte created a child identical to herself because she just wanted to experiment, I guess? Ellie Sattler does tell Maisie a little later that Charlotte visited her university once, and she remembers her saying how much she wanted to have a child, which maybe implies that she was infertile and this was her workaround, but it's not made clear. Now, the one piece of information we're given in Fallen Kingdom that this new reveal is consistent with is when Benjamin tells Maisie that her mother once visited the park. At the time, the conclusion that we were to draw from this is that Hammond and Lockwood were still business partners at the time Jurassic Park was under construction, and Lockwood invited his daughter for a visit. In Dominion, we learn that Charlotte was a colleague of Dr. Wu's, so it's self-explanatory. We even see a photo of her in front of the Jurassic Park gate when Maisie is flipping through Benjamin's photo album. But here's where it starts to get iffy. When you think about those subtle hints in Fallen Kingdom at Benjamin wanting Maisie to be exactly like his daughter, either you have to think that those moments never actually meant anything, or you wonder, if that was the motivation behind those moments, that Benjamin wanted her to be convincing to him as Charlotte, why didn't he call her by that name? You could say that this was out of respect for his dead daughter, but if he did want to honor her that way, you'd think that he would raise Maisie to be her own person. After all, she really is technically his biological granddaughter. It might be nice to treat her as such. And now, here's the plot hole so big you'd think this movie was hit by an asteroid. In Fallen Kingdom, it wasn't just a singular statement and nothing beyond that revealed to us that Maisie was a clone. There was a backstory established from this. It was made clear that it was Benjamin Lockwood's desire to bring his daughter back through their cloning technology, hence why he and Hammond ended their partnership. Hammond saw human cloning as a step too far outside of the moral boundary, as mentioned by Eli Mills when he reveals Maisie's identity to Claire and Owen.
What do you think drove Hammond and Lockwood apart? Huh? Lockwood never had a grandchild. He just wanted his daughter back.
Now with Dominion flat out contradicting this, we're forced to wonder as to why on earth Mills would just make all of this up. The most you could say is that he just spur of the moment pulled this out of his butt to give the story more credence, but even that slim argument doesn't hold water at all. What does he say to Lockwood right before killing him?
You know, I've been thinking. John Hammond was right. It was an unholy thing that you did.
So if it wasn't Benjamin who cloned Maisie, what was Mills talking about? It's undeniable that this was his honest understanding. So the only remaining possibility is that he was misinformed. So I asked myself, is there any reason why Lockwood would have lied to Mills about this? And no, why would there be? As the beginning of Dominion establishes, Maisie has scientific value regardless of the way she was cloned. So Benjamin wouldn't tell Mills that she was cloned while making it out that he did it and claiming that he and Hammond split because of it. Either he's going to trust Mills with the entire truth or none of it. And heck, Mills was with Lockwood before Maisie was conceived. He said that he had been managing Lockwood's foundation since college, so that's about at least 15 years. I'll give a little extra leeway and say 12. That means that Maisie was born after 3 of those years. Now perhaps Mills didn't know Charlotte personally, but he obviously would have known who she was. Maisie would of course go to live with Benjamin right after Charlotte died, and she was a year or 2 old when that happened. So what's Benjamin going to say to Mills when he introduces her to him? Would he be like, here she is, my clone daughter. Sucks that Charlotte died, so I knew I had to get on top of this right away, and gotta say, I impressed myself. I got it done in record time. And hey, what do you know? She's 2 years old already. They grow up so freaking fast, don't they? So even if Lockwood did have some reason to lie to Mills about this, there's not even a plausible scenario where he had the chance. So there you have it. When you think about it for even a little, this new reveal in Dominion falls apart completely. As I say all this, some of you may be thinking, come on, Alex, you're reading too deep into it. Just turn your brain off and enjoy the movie. And well, I'm sorry. A turn your brain off and enjoy kind of movie is just not what Jurassic Park has ever been to me. It's always meant a lot more. I would hope especially that the closing chapter to the story would make everything seem cohesive and consistent, and it is fascinating to me how so little care was taken to do that. Just think how much better it would be if this movie followed through on what we knew from Fallen Kingdom, if it stuck with the tragedy of Maisie being told all her life how wonderful her mother was, only to find out that she really didn't have a mother. In that way, I feel like Dominion could have committed to what The Rise of Skywalker backed off from. Somewhat similarly to Rey, Maisie starts out thinking that her mother was someone great, but she soon learns that her mother was nobody. And in this case, not just nobody important, but literally nobody. As she struggles with these thoughts that she's not a real person, she eventually comes to see that it doesn't matter who or where you came from. What matters is what you make of yourself. And Fallen Kingdom had given us a perfectly good setup for Maisie's story in the next one, as well as Claire, Owen, and even Dr. Wu's. You know, something I said at the end of my top 10 invalid criticisms with Fallen Kingdom is that I wondered if the reviews for that movie would be any more positive once we saw the characters' decisions get their payoff in Dominion. But turns out, there's not much in the way of a payoff. And frankly, I don't see the reviews for Fallen Kingdom getting any better now. If anything, I only see them getting worse, because people will look on it in retrospect and realize that it was a gigantic build-up to a lot of great ideas that never really manifest. This is actually one of a few things I said in that video that are now rendered kind of hollow with Dominion in the picture. Not among them is how I feel about all the vitriol toward Maisie in Fallen Kingdom for releasing the dinosaurs. She's the real villain. She tried to get people killed. I'm still not sugarcoating it. That is a patently ludicrous interpretation of that scene. Seriously, if you can't walk a meter in the shoes of a confused, broken-hearted little girl, I don't want to know you. That being said, in the case of Dominion, because she's gotten older, and yet the state of the world doesn't have any discernible effect on her, and she spends a lot of the movie acting all sassy and snooty, I have to be fair on the detractors and say that it does kind of make her character come across rather unsympathetic. And no, I'm not going to tell them to just go read the books. Now, after the disappointment of Dominion, I do appreciate what Off the Grid gave us, and I am looking forward to the next two books that are currently on the way, but it doesn't change how I feel about Dominion. We shouldn't have to turn to the books for something that should be so vital to the movie. This is another example of why averting the focus from how the dinosaurs are changing the world is this movie's fatal mistake, because not only does it waste endless potential for thrilling scenarios, but it also eliminates all of the character arcs that were set up by the ending of Fallen Kingdom with the introduction of that premise. Maisie's story in Dominion should have been about her reconciling with that choice she made, along with coming to terms with her identity. How powerful would it have been if this reinforced her feelings that she's not a real human being because she thinks to herself, a real human being wouldn't have done what I did? It would make for a moving commentary on childhood trauma, of teens and young adults who feel shame for something that happened to them when they were little that really wasn't their fault. If the dinosaurs now roaming the Earth had something to do with the plot, this would be why Maisie doesn't want to stay bound to the cabin. It's not just about wanting to get out into the world, but to join Claire and Owen in doing good in the world, even though they try to reassure her that she was a victim of circumstances, so none of this is on her. Nevertheless, when it comes time for Claire and Owen to begin investigating the ways that Biosyn is taking advantage of the global crisis, Maisie takes a page from Kelly Curtis and sneaks onto the trip. And she does this knowing that it may get her close to people who probably want to take her away to a lab and chop her to bits, but it's a risk she's willing to take. That would be an excellent way of building on her story from the last movie, and it would make her character all the more likable. How about when she meets Alan Grant? She could tell him what she did, and he responds in a callback to what he says to Billy in Jurassic Park 3.
Look, you have to believe me. This was a stupid decision, but I did it with the best intentions.
With the best intentions? Some of the worst things imaginable have been done with the best intentions.
Except this time, he doesn't use the condemning tone with Maisie that he realized was a mistake to use with Billy. Instead, he approaches the matter with a softer heart, saying to her something like, "Sometimes the best intentions can lead to outcomes that we never wanted. But sometimes out of those unwanted outcomes can arise the most beautiful things." And as the movie goes on, even Grant comes to see just how true his own words are, as they all discover, say, an amazing ecological benefit dinosaurs have on humans that outweighs the danger they pose to them. This would be how Maisie, Claire, and Owen find their peace. And it would mean that those words from Dr. Grant encapsulate the entire expanse of the saga. It all started with John Hammond, a man with the best of intentions that led to a lot of terrible outcomes, and yet eventually, it all amounted to this incredibly beautiful thing. Man, the more I think about it, the more I see all of the countless interesting directions that this movie could have gone, and for whatever reason, they just went with all of the least interesting options. So, what are your thoughts? You agree with my points? Disagree? Did you like what this movie did with Maisie's character? Did you like the new reveal? Or are you in agreement with me and are just driven mad by it? Whatever it be, let me know in the comments. There is still yet quite a bit more in this movie I want to talk about, so be sure to stick around for part 4, in which I'll be going over Louis Dodgson and Biosyn's role. That's a wrap, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and share, subscribe for more. This is Pop Culture, I'm Alex Pop.